just seeing how the big players can tap in to these young startups ideas, and shifts are going to happen across the way we live and work, I think, dramatically during this pandemic and post-pandemic period.
Welcome to Gigging, Everything in the Sharing Economy, the podcast that talks about the gigging, sharing, and platform economies that is expected to grow to $335 billion by 2025. This is the podcast where CEOs, founders, market makers, and market leaders come to talk about the future of the gig, sharing, and platform economies. I hope you recognized Elle Tucker in the open, because we have another gigging news episode. Elle and I are going to cover some fun topics, from food, furniture, to fashion, all from a gigging, sharing, and platform perspective. And oh yeah, we throw in a few of our favorites, Airbnb and ride sharing. I hope you enjoy this episode of Gigging News. Let's get right into it. Guys, this is another Gigging News episode, and myself and Elle Tucker are going to bring you the top 6 stories that occurred in the gig sharing and platform economy. Good morning or good afternoon to you, Elle.
Hi, Mark. Lovely to be here again. And we've got some great stories this week, which is, or this month, should I say, which is really exciting.
Absolutely. And the first one right off the bat is our favorite company to talk about, Airbnb.
Yes, we do like to chat about them, don't we? But no wonder, because they are the poster child of the sharing economy, and everything they do is very interesting when it comes to this whole business model. So, of course, the big news has been that they have decided to go public. It's been on the cards for quite a while, but they are filing their IPO paperwork right in the middle of the pandemic, which obviously has prompted a lot of discussion from all of those people who are interested in this giant of the sharing economy. So what has prompted them to do this at this time? Because obviously the travel sector and Airbnb themselves have been hugely affected by the pandemic. And, even to the point where Airbnb, I don't know if you saw it, Mark, they set up a whole website for all the people that they had to lay off from the company to help them to find jobs. It almost became a kind of recruitment platform in itself. That was the level of redundancies they had to make. So it's an interesting move, and one that I suppose I was in danger of thinking maybe too positively about, in the sense that I I went on LinkedIn and talked about this and talked about how, it was a bit of a kind of canary down the mine for the sharing economy, and a real kind of test of what was happening at the moment. I kind of saw it as being reasonably positive, in the sense that travel, has been very restricted, but what Airbnb allows you to do is maybe to staycation in your own country, to do that in a more cost-effective way, to make an income out of something you already have if you've been furloughed or face redundancy. And, a trend like this is surely going to serve us well in the new normal, as we talk about. So maybe this filing for an IPO is a sign that this type of home sharing style travel is on the up in spite of difficult times. So I did go on and sort of share some thoughts on that, but I just wanted to tell you about a really interesting guy that I know called Martin. Martin Aretz, and he is Dutch. He's a platform expert, and I do advise anyone who's interested in platform models to check him out on Twitter and have a look, because he's got some really interesting emails, newsletters that he sends out. But he responded to my maybe slightly, what do you call it, Pollyanna approach to the Airbnb IPO, and said that one of the, a few other reasons that are slightly maybe, more on the negative side are that early Airbnb employees and investors have been waiting for more than a decade, because obviously Airbnb have been around for a while, to cash out of their early investment, and some of them have got restricted stock options that will actually expire early 2021. So this is one of the reasons they've been sort of their hand has been forced, and the public markets are actually doing quite well at the moment. So this is a good time. So I think there's some political stuff going on in the background, and that he'd said that the latest $1 billion funding deal with I think Silver Lake and Sixth Street Partners came with a low interest rate, which is usually reserved for companies in distress, and Airbnb will be keen to refinance now and raise some additional capital. So there seems to be a lot going on in the background, and I didn't necessarily want to sort of come in and say, well, this is a really good thing for the sharing economy. It seemed like it to me, but I'm sure there are some layers to this that we maybe aren't privy to, but there's stuff going on in the background that has caused them to make this move. So I don't know what your thoughts were, Mark, when you saw the news initially, and what did you think that was quite an interesting move to make at this time?
Yeah, it seemed like I think I agree with Martin. It seemed like a very desperate move at the time, because Airbnb, the best time for them to go public would have been a couple of years ago, when they had $1 billion in cash on hand and at the peak of their business model in terms of bookings. I mean, every article that was coming out was saying how they were disrupting the travel industry and making hotels and resorts rethink how they run their business models. Hit the pandemic, and they found themselves in the middle of a little buzzsaw when it came to revenue dropping off. They reported a $400 million adjusted loss in the second quarter, which is not a great time to announce that you're going public when your revenues are going down that fast. So I agree with Martin that there's some other reasons other than, hey, I got a winning model to go public and try to get cash out of the public markets. They had some interior motives in terms of employees wanting to cash out before the business model maybe completely collapsed if the pandemic continues to be extended. And then, as you mentioned, if you got a lot of debt that needs to be refinanced, you want to go ahead and try to figure out some ways to do that more creatively and to tap into other cash options, which may be the public markets, which are red hot right now despite the pandemic. So, yeah, I agree with that. The outlook for these guys, bookings are starting to recover, but they aren't the traditional bookings. I know here in Atlanta, we've seen a lot of situations where young people are doing short-term bookings just to have parties. There's a house in my neighborhood at Buckhead that they call the party mansion. And they are booking this mansion, and 400 or 500 people are showing up. Noise complaints, everything that you can imagine. And I can't imagine that Airbnb would want to go public with that being the type of revenue they're bringing in.
Yeah, I think there's been some legislation actually in the UK around that, exactly that sort of, renting a house very locally to you just to have a large gathering, which is obviously breaching the current COVID regulations as well. But do you think that any of the positive aspects I took from this are the case, in the sense that, if this type of model can, prevail at the moment, then, is a good indicator for other similar smaller platforms? Is there, am I maybe I need to be more cynical about it, but I did take some positives from it.
No, I think the model, and I'm one of Airbnb's biggest fans in terms of the model and how it has created value for the host, for the guests, as well as for surrounding businesses, the Airbnb effect, as they call it. So local businesses picking up incremental revenue because of the bookings for putting people in places where they can take advantage of their shops and their coffee and local stores. So I love what Airbnb does for communities, and I do think tapping into the public markets to ensure their survival is a great thing and a great indicator for other platforms. There may be two sides to this sword for them. Having been a part of a couple of Fortune 500 companies, Accenture and when they went public in 1999, some of it was to tap into the public markets. Some of it was because people really wanted to get value out of the company for themselves. What percent of that was value for yourself versus value and benefit for the company, I can't say, but it certainly was a strong motivator. Mm-hmm. Did that mean that the model that Accenture built and that Airbnb is building were damaged by the public offering? No. So I do think the positive sides are there, and it is a positive indicator for the rest of the sharing economy.
That's good. And this segues so neatly because we're talking about IPOs, and of course the other big, poster child of the gig economy, I suppose, sitting alongside Airbnb up there is Uber, and they have already reached that stage. And you have a story, don't you, about the rideshare space, and obviously, not Uber specifically, but another company which really challenges some of the things that Uber maybe has come under fire for.
Yeah, the RideConnect platform, and I think they're positioning themselves truly as a platform as opposed to a transportation company. The article comes out of Yahoo Finance, dated back in September of 2020, and it talks about RideConnect and interviews their CEO, Santosh-Krisnan. And his argument is that most of the companies are truly transportation companies like Uber and Lyft and many others in the space, because they so tightly control how the employees work. They never position themselves as a platform. And I guess by him making these comments, he agrees with the ruling that the California legislature has put out there in terms of classifying these employees, these drivers as employees. Now, RideConnect, though, says that their platform has always been a service that anyone can use to offer their abilities, be it a driving or any other sharing related service, to customers. And that puts him out of the business of trying to control the worker as enabling the worker to participate in rideshare activities. And what I like about that is that now it can change the discussion with a mature platform like RideConnect. It opens it up to individual drivers as well as even taxi companies to use the technology to offer up the types of services that people have become accustomed to on platforms like Uber and Lyft without the legislative friction that companies like Uber and Lyft have run into.
So when you say 100% of independence, that means that they can use the platform, but really to set up their own business in a sense, that they are completely autonomous.
Right.
With. Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's
exactly.
Interesting, isn't it?
It is. It makes you truly a contractor or independent worker or a small business owner, because you're using the platform as a tool, and the platform is not using you as the tool. I guess is the way he would look at it, as compared to how Uber and Lyft, who are creating the rules by which you operate, and if you violate those rules, you can no longer be on the platform. You can configure this platform to work with the model and the way you choose to work.
Mm-hmm. So I suppose that from the point of view of the user, then they would have to be very careful about who was liable for any problems with that, because it kind of, it removes the responsibility from RideConnect, doesn't it, and puts it solely with the drivers. And from the user's point of view, they need to be very clear about that when they enter into using the platform, wouldn't they?
Yeah, exactly. It really does put the onus back on the contractor, just like your plumber or your electrician. If they have their own business, they're buying tools to perform their work, and they take on any of the liability for the services that they provide. And RideConnect is offering up their platform in much the same way for people who want to build a business or provide services in the ride sharing space.
I'm going to be interested to see how this one this one evolves, I think, because if this model works, and obviously with all the Californian issues and the AB5, and obviously the Uber have been in the news today in the UK, because they have been allowed to continue operating in London, but obviously it's a tricky area, and if platforms like RideConnect can make this model work in a better way, then all eyes will be on them as it evolves, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll be interested to see how it plays out too, and how many organizations, taxi cab companies, uh, take up this platform and use it to better manage their business. Because, as we've said in previous episodes, you can't put this genie back in the bottle. People want to operate this way. They like the ability to be able to use their smart device to find a ride, and then watch as that ride or that car approaches them, have a better estimate of when they're going to arrive. All of those types of benefits you're not going to want to give up. And so this gives many more organizations the opportunity to do that. But in researching this particular article, I've dug into a few other articles. Back in the end of 2019, Carol Said published an article in the San Francisco Chronicle that basically said if taxi cab companies that operate independent contractors go down this path, what separates them from being any different than Uber or Lyft? So the AB5 legislation could drag into this discussion some of the same players who were pushing for regulation on Uber and Lyft, and force them to face the same sort of cost of managing employee benefits and the like. So yeah, I'd be interested to see how this all plays out.
Maybe we can revisit it a bit further along the line, when we do it next to a sort of rideshare and shared mobility themed episode.
Yeah. We probably should even track down the CEO here,
Yeah,
Santosh-Krisnan, and get him on the show.
that would be great.
Absolutely.
So
Well,
what's next?
what's next is food. I know
Ooh.
I love a little food, and the sharing economy again is dipping its toe into this area. In earlier episodes, we talked about how this had become a big thing in China, where you could cook food and share it with others through platforms that make it easily available to individuals looking for that. So you're bypassing the restaurants and going directly to someone's home and picking up the food that they've prepared. And that's what we see kind of raising its head again here in the States, where pockets of this had emerged in Ohio and parts of California, but then regulatory agencies swooped in and said, hey, we're not going to allow that. It's starting to raise its head again, primarily because of the pandemic. The pandemic has closed many restaurants, many bars, and so officials now are rethinking how they will legislate the sale of food from the home. And the article that I pulled up was from Sam Harnett, and from kged.org is where he published the article. And you have one county, as he writes in this article, Riverside, that has now opened up and allow individuals to share their food via platforms with anyone in the county. Now, that's the first county that has done this. And so they've attracted a couple of startups to the county that are testing the model and see if they can make it work, where you go on, you sign up, you find the people who want to cook and the people obviously who want to buy from those folks, and you create a market like you have with any other service that we talk about. You have a couple of players. The Los Angeles-based Dish Divvy is one of them. Another called Chef, but they spell it SHEF. Both of these players have moved into the market and are trying to see if they can build models that work. Now, here's the rub. Most of the regulatory agencies that are going after Uber and Lyft are trying to put up barriers because they don't want venture capital money to come in and do to this market what it has done to ride sharing. And so they're trying to put up barriers to say, here's how you will operate if you want to run a home cooked business in these markets. And some of those barriers limit how the technology can be used and limit how you can interface with delivery agencies like DoorDash, like Deliveroo, and other players like that, so that the model does not push out small players and make it into a huge venture-backed tech company that, again, ends up being a clash between local providers, as in taxi cabs and Uber, but replicated in the food market. So I think it's interesting that you're starting to see this, and there's legislation being pushed now in California to open up more counties to this model, assuming these tech companies can work with not having delivery agents connected to their business models.
It's quite interesting, this, almost blocking that VC involvement in it, isn't it? Because, it's, I suppose it's a sort of, there are shades here because, by getting a bit of investment, these ideas, chef, I like that name spelled with an S, and dish divvy, with some investment, they could really empower their local communities where they are. I'm a keen cook myself. What a brilliant idea to be able to actually offer your meals out. I'd quite like the idea of that myself. Quite often I cook, especially in lockdown at the weekends, just to kind of amuse myself. And there's only so many people here in the house to eat it. I like the idea of that. And with some investment, that could really help the model to expand. But, I see what they're doing here. They don't want it to become something quite different. But do you not think that with some investment that might help?
Yeah, I do. I do. I think what they're hoping to not have happen to get one dominant player that locks up every household that wants to offer their food up and then create a ecosystem that prevents them from being an independent contractor and to be able to really benefit from all of their effort. I guess that's the rub that they're trying to push back against, and wanting to try to keep it more community based so that the people who are doing the cooking, who are doing the work, can market and benefit from the model. It's a tough road to navigate because for people to really take advantage of the work that they're doing, they got to have visibility to the customers. And to have visibility to the customers, you have to have a market. And to have a market, you need the technology, and that just leads you right back to the money. You need the money to be able to run these things. Eventually we'll get probably the RideConnect of the food space, someone that'll build a platform and say, hey, I'm just going to put it out here and you guys can use this platform to run your business and not have to have a dominant brand that markets this service and pulls all of these households in.
Mm-hmm. And I think obviously there's a big health and safety thing around just, your food. And obviously these days, we have to be particularly attentive to people with allergies or food intolerances, etc. So there's quite a lot there. I'd be interested to speak to my marketplace risk colleague Jeremy about the legal implications of sharing food on a marketplace as well, because I'm sure that there are quite a few risks involved in doing that as well. And you had another food story, I think, which fits quite neatly onto this, doesn't it? Because we are talking about cooking and cloud kitchens. And
Exactly. You perfect segue on the question about food safety, because the models that popped up in Ohio, they shut them down and then gave them the option to operate a virtual kitchen or ghost kitchen or a commercial kitchen where they cook the food in venues that were approved by the local regulatory bodies and then making them eligible to be resold to the public. And this story takes us all the way to Malaysia, where they have kicked off this option in their local markets and tapping into the virtual kitchen or ghost kitchens, as you mentioned. This article comes from nst.com and was written by Eleanor. And the cloud kitchen concept is one where they will deliver only food that is cooked in these commercial kitchens. There's no storefront, there's no dining area, and there's just delivery out of a kitchen that has been set up for entrepreneurs to prepare their food in. Now, we have two of these here in Atlanta that have been operating since about 2009, 2010. A commercial kitchen that is set up with several kitchens in the a warehouse type facility, entrepreneurs can come in and sign up for different plans where they can either cook, they can cook and store, they can cook, store, and pack. They can even, run their business up to a certain point out of the commercial kitchen. And the commercial kitchen provides all the tools to get everything done, including packaging, barcoding, and getting your food ready for the stores in a certified, approved kitchen that you can tap into with various different options. Pay as you go, license it out for the month, license it out for the year.
Is the one in Atlanta, is that on a platform, or is that something that's been around for a while, but more in a kind of give them a call, turn up, book it type old-fashioned way? Because we've been I've come across one actually here in Edinburgh called Occupied, which is a similar thing, but it was actually a platform, a kind of Airbnb for commercial cooking and actually other types of space where you want to do a job, but that's more kind of people who maybe have a kitchen and a cafe or something, and maybe it's not open in the evening and people can go in and use that. So it's more on demand. Whereas the one you're talking about in Atlanta, is that more of a kind of, like a regular style rather than not platform?
Yeah, this is more regular style. I actually met with them and interviewed the owner. And that was my first question. Why aren't you putting a website on top of your service? Because they have every type of business that you can imagine. The people who want to cook cakes and deliver those cakes to other major retailers, say a Publix or a Kroger grocery store. These entrepreneurs will go in and they are the vendor that provides all the baked goods for several grocery store chains. They'll produce everything in that facility, ship it out of that facility to those stores. My question to her was, why aren't you now giving these particular vendors more options by allowing people to order direct online and place orders so that they could have them delivered? And that was an eye-opening discussion, because those individual vendors were starting to do it on their own. There's one player, well, basically she sells grubs, worms. And she's turned worms into power food, cookies and other protein-based food that runners and super athletes are just crazy about. She started out just selling these chocolate chip grub cookies as a healthy alternative to other types of protein, and tapped into a market. When she put up her website, she started getting orders from all over, and the kitchen became her way to fulfill it. So that's what this particular kitchen in Malaysia is doing. The online ordering on top of the cloud kitchen gives those people who are renting space the opportunity now to run a business right from the commercial kitchen and not have the issues that you talked about earlier around food health and food safety.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I've read a bit about insect eating. It's quite interesting. It's meant to be, a very good, future of food concept, because it's much more sustainable source of protein than obviously things like eating, meat or beef and things like that.
Yeah. I learned a lot from her. The CEO name of I think it's Grubworks. Kizzy Stokes is the CEO, and she said that she could grow the protein equivalent of a cow in a small closet with those grubs, and that essentially they're the cleanest source of protein in terms of environmental impact out there. There's no cleaner source of protein than grubs. And you see it in France, you see it in parts of Africa. It's already become a staple. And the kitchen that she works with in Decatur, Georgia, helped get her approved as a grub farmer, believe it or not. So she is the only grub farmer in the state of Georgia.
That's amazing. And, I think that we eat things like prawns, and I kind of like look at a sort of locust type thing, people eating things like that, and think, oh, that's horrible. And then, prawns have just got just as many legs and eyes and things like that. It's no different, except that they live in the water, is it?
Right.
It's all to do with our kind of preconceptions about what's edible and what's not. But I'd certainly give it a try. Maybe with plenty of seasoning, though.
Well, when you taste her chocolate chip cookies, you can't tell the difference.
No, I bet you can't. Oh,
Yeah,
I'd definitely give that a try.
yeah, I've had tons of them, and I've when I spoke to the owner of the DeKalb kitchen, that was my argument. You gotta find a way to turn your kitchen into a cloud kitchen, and not only will that benefit the individual vendors, it could be explosive growth for the company as well, for the actual cloud kitchen, because depending on the model and what sort of revenue share plans you put together, you ramp up their revenue, you get more revenue for the cloud kitchen.
Yeah, and what I really love about this model, this cloud and ghost kitchen idea, is the really what I like about this sharing economy. It's something that's sitting there unused, and more use can be made of it rather than creating something new, and I think that's there. It democratizes access to these things. Maybe people who are hardly ever need, or occasionally need these types of kitchen to do what they need to do. Like you say, baked goods. Maybe somebody needs to do very small amounts that wouldn't be able to access a commercial kitchen normally, can do it for 2 or 3 hours or whatever they need. So it really does open things up for people, and I really like that about it.
Yeah, I love that too, because Kizzy, her full-time job is with the CDC, and so she's out, working on big issues during the day, but at night she runs this cookie business, and the commercial kitchen being a 24/7 operation gives her the time to do that. And when she's not in that space, someone else is utilizing it to build their business, and she's able to store her work product, her raw ingredients as well as the processed cookies, in an environment at temperatures where they're safe and can be consumed by the public and not have to worry about any sort of food, health, or safety issues. Yeah, I love that because it empowers a lot more people who have the itch to be entrepreneurs, and it does it in a way where the public can benefit from, their creativity and ingenuity.
Definitely, definitely.
So that leads us to more people sharing stuff. We talked about a kitchen, but what about the rest of the house?
Yes, I love this story, and in fact, my these last two stories kind of go together because there's been two big news stories around the sharing economy, the rental economy. We're hearing that expression a lot more. Access over ownership, these types of themes that are very popular with the younger generation. And I thought I'd sort of put these two together. The first one is about John Lewis. Now, John Lewis it's it's a kind of national treasure in the UK, and it's a chain of stores throughout the UK, which is a kind of department store, and they, you go there for your clothes and your furniture and, your maybe beauty products, these types of things, electronics. It's based on a more sort of cooperative model, actually, John Lewis, and it's really popular in the UK. My mum loves John Lewis; you can't keep her away. So even in the pandemic, she's been heading down there with her mask on, and they have announced actually that they are not reaching out to my mother particularly, but rather the next generation of customers was the quote in the article. This was in the Guardian actually. Jonathan Marsh, their director of home, has announced that their furniture is now going to be available to rent. This is a huge deal because not only are they basically saying that they are making a massive change to their business model to support a more sustainable ethos, they're reaching out to a younger generation of customers, but they are also, very interestingly for us in our discussion, Mark, partnering with a third-party platform. Now, this is Fat-llama.
I love that name. I talked about them. I think they're going into their second or third year, but when they first launched, I read an article and I read Fat Llama. I love that name.
Yes. No, do you know what, Mark? I think they've been around longer than that, actually. I remember them right when I first got involved in the sharing economy. They were one of the players in the UK ahead of their time. They
Right.
really stuck at it, these guys, and they have done well. They it's the whole idea of a stuff sharing marketplace. It's a tricky one, and not there really isn't a player out there who has nailed it. There's a few who are jostling for position, but we've seen quite a few come and go, because the problem is with stuff. It's like, well, what stuff? Is that stuff in your garage? Is there a focus on sort of electronics or camera equipment, these types of things? So to have a generic, sharing marketplace is a tricky one. But what Fat Llama have done is teamed up with John Lewis. Now, this is good for their success, and it's good for what John Lewis are trying to do. The service is going to be available initially just in London, but it is set to roll out nationally. And Chaz, who's the CEO of Fat Llama, who I've been connected with on sort of platforms like LinkedIn and stuff for a while, are expecting the UK through this to follow you guys over in the US, where renting furniture instead of owning it is the new normal. It's not something we're familiar with over here. I think you are ahead of your time in that. And returned items just get cleaned and then rented out to a new customer. So I was really excited to see this story. I think it shows a real shift, and I think some of these shifts have happened all the more quickly because of the pandemic, partly because people's incomes have been reduced, partly because people have seen changes, happen at pace in terms of technology. Also, during the lockdown, emissions were reduced dramatically, and people could see, I'm sure you saw them yourself, all these pictures of sort of wildlife running loose in the cities and clearer skies, etc. People understand that small changes make a difference quite fast, and I think that attitudes are changing, and also people are focusing more on their homes. So the stars were really in line for this to happen. I'd be really interested to know when the talks began and whether they've been speeded up by the pandemic. But I'm really excited to see this, although I'm not sure I would trust my children with a rented piece of John Lewis furniture, because some of the stuff is quite expensive and they're still at the accidentally drawing on things stage, so I'm not sure.
Well, that's the good thing about this particular model, that is you can actually hang on to it after you've started renting it if you want to keep it. Much like the models you have here in the U.S., where you can rent to own or rent for a defined period. It's one that allows people to make that decision at whatever point makes sense for their career, their life, whatever transition point they're at. If they want nice furniture, they can rent it, return it, get new furniture if that's what they want to do, or keep renting it and rent to own. And you're right, that's been something that has been a staple here in the U.S. There are a number of players that have been renting furniture, from Rent-A-Center to Aaron's, H.H. Gregg, Ashley Home Store. These are all players in the U.S. that rent brand name furniture, appliances for as little as $20 a week for these different items that you can bring into your home, and with plans to rent to own. Where it's different with what Fat Llama and John Lewis, and just for the American audience, this is not the John Lewis that just passed away, the congressman who marched across the Edmund Pettus Bridge. It is a chain store that is very popular in the UK, so I don't want the US audience to get confused by the name John Lewis. But Rent-A-Center typically targets middle to lower income persons in the US with their offering, who want brand name appliances that you would get out of some of your higher end store. And you're going to pay a little bit more for the option to rent, but you're going to get the things that you want. Where Fat Llama and John Lewis are coming in is they're giving you higher end, and they're targeting, I think, a higher end customer with this offering, which is something you haven't typically seen. And what I'd be interested to see is if that trend catches on here in the U.S., where players who have the higher end furniture team up with a sharing economy platform to offer up their brands to higher end customers that have typically purchased these items.
Yeah, and I think that for the brand, such as the John Lewis store chain, to see these platforms already there and that technology in place makes it a lot easier to make that decision. And the same thing has happened with Selfridges. So Selfridges, more a London-based high-end clothing and fashion retail department store as well. There used to be a Selfridges many years ago in Oxford when I was growing up there, but I have a feeling now that there aren't as many. In fact, it could be that they're only in London. I'm not entirely sure. But what they've done is similar to John Lewis, and they have teamed up with an existing platform. And in this case, it's hurr-collective. I think that hurr is HURR, is means rent or something in possibly Swedish, and that's not very accurate of me to say that, but that's I'm sure that the name is based on that idea, and it's a fashion rental marketplace and fairly new as well. And they have been cherry-picked by Selfridges to be part of their move towards fashion rental. And again, a huge trend and a huge shift amidst the pandemic, which is, it's fascinating times here that people have shifted. Obviously, in terms of going out, people haven't had such a need to rent maybe evening wear, which has always been the classic fashion rental choice, because what you're doing there is accessing something you will only need for a short period of time, but something that is maybe much more expensive than you would normally buy, which really sets you up to be the perfect move for a sharing economy transaction. Here, what we're doing is really tapping into the desire, again, amongst probably a younger generation, to not own as many things. And this can be for financial reasons. Again, there's a sustainability and the endorsement, as the article says. Oh, this article was in the UK newspaper, The Telegraph, actually. And and it has actually told me that hurr is Afrikaans, the name. It means rent in Afrikaans. So I got the rent part right, but the language wrong. So apologies for that. The endorsement of a name like Selfridges is, the article states, a sign that rental might just be here to stay. And I think it's very true. When you see a big brand like this getting on board with this idea, it gives it a huge amount of validation, especially for people, maybe are more traditional in their views, that need to see brands like John Lewis and Selfridges being part of this before they decide to access it themselves. And I think that's real credibility for these smaller players like hurr-collective and like fat-llama to say, look, we've been working away on this in the background, believing in this idea, believing in access over ownership, and almost waiting for these big players to look around them and think, there's a shift going on here, and we want to be a part of it, and we're going to invite these young players, these young platforms and small businesses in, and endorse the idea through getting them involved in these partnerships. And that's really exciting in itself. So I'm going to be looking out for more partnerships of this kind happening in the UK and the US and all over, and just seeing how the big players can tap in to these young startups ideas, and shifts are going to happen across the way we live and work, I think, dramatically during this pandemic and post-pandemic period.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. My year-end predictions, the last show of 2019 of this podcast, one of my main predictions was that there will be many, many, many more partnerships between status quo brands, kind of traditional brands, and the sharing economy platforms, because of everything we see happening underneath. The App Jobs Institute data suggests that more of the millennials are moving to where the opportunities are. And I can remember the last time I made a major move from the East Coast to the West Coast, I was able to pack everything I owned in a small Nissan Sentra and drive that all the way across America, and then pick up the things I needed when I got there. If that's the same sort of mindset we're going to see with gig workers in the sharing economy, people would much rather keep a few core items and then use everything else by the transaction, be it furniture, be it a heater, be it a car, be it even their music. I have a huge DVD collection. Most people are going to put that in the cloud. Things that we traditionally used to hang on to and need space to manage it or store it, the millennials just aren't embracing it in the same way past generations did. And so they can be a lot more mobile. They can go where the opportunities are, and they can reassemble their life pretty quickly if these players allow them to buy and use by the transaction or rent when they want to upgrade their experiences. And I think, quite frankly, we're going to see a complete revolution of our main street and our core brands to operate the way this new generation wants to live.
Yeah, it's so interesting, isn't it? And you're right. They call it the Netflix generation, don't they? It's like they want stuff on demand. They don't feel the need to own it, and it's such a huge psychological shift as well between people of our generation and the younger ones coming through. It's like, why would I want to own that? Because I'll want a different one next week,
Right. And it's going to, like I said, it's going to revolutionize, including government. 10 years ago, you had politicians saying, hey, we need to change the tax code and tax people on what they use as opposed to what they own. And this will escalate and that movement, because if you don't own property but you're using property, it's going to affect how much revenue states can bring in. And so that's a huge shift in how people think and how they are going to want to work, and how these brands and even how government is going to have to function to support that.
And I think what's really exciting about Selfridges and this partnership here is that it makes it cool. And I think that when you've managed to nail that, that's when, where people will, start adopting something en masse. It's, if it becomes cool, it becomes a trend rather than something, a bit sort of worthy happening in the background. That's when big shifts will happen.
Right. I think you and I have been saying it for a while. We're going to have to stop calling it the sharing gig and platform economy and just start calling it the economy.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Definitely.
Well, we have nailed it. 6 stories, another great show. And guys, we can't wait to get busy researching the next big 6 and bringing that to you in a couple of weeks. Elle, this has been fun.
It's been great, Mark. Thank you. Some great stories in the episode today. So I really enjoyed it. And as you say, can't wait to see what our next ones will be, because there's never a dull moment in the sharing and gig economy, is there?
Never a dull moment. Elle and I thank you for listening to Gigging News. And if you enjoyed the episode, share it with a friend. And if you really enjoyed the episode, or we made you laugh just a little, please go in and leave us a comment and leave us a rating. That helps us with those pesky algorithms. Yeah, we want to move up in the rankings so that more people can hear Elle and I talk about the fun things that are going on in the gig, sharing, and platform economies. Hey, if you like gigging news, you may like one of my other podcasts, Gorillapreneur, The Art of Waging Small Business Warfare. If you're a small business owner, you're a maverick, that might just be the podcast for you. And Career Coaching X's and O's. You probably heard me mention all of the years of experience I've had in corporate America. Yeah, I go back and tell you all the mistakes I made in Career Coaching X's and O's. It has been ranked in the top 15 among career coaching podcasts on the web. Very proud of what we've done on that podcast. Check them both out. There will be links in the show notes. Guys, please hit the subscribe button. We have some exciting interviews coming up in the next few weeks of people you just don't want to miss. The CEO of Enloya, Manuel Sanchez, will be coming on to talk about building a platform for lawyers to sell their services by the transaction. Wow. We also have Rob Brown from Curb talking about the globalization of parking. Yeah, they're the Airbnb of parking. We got that CEO on to talk about that business model and everything that's happening. You don't want to miss these interviews. This is where all the major players come. CEOs, market leaders, market makers come to talk about the future of the gig, sharing, and platform economies. Guys, as Elle and I often say, if you're not using the gig, sharing, or platform economy to disrupt your market, your company might be the next thing that gets disrupted. Till next time, guys, peace.